What's going on, everybody? It's Mike and Matt, and we're back for some more New York Sports Rehab, a special edition podcast today. We're breaking down the 2021 New York Mets season. Obviously, a bit disappointing in how things turned, and considering you spend 100+ days in first place in your division, and you finish the season with a record below 500. But today, we're kind of going to break it down a little bit in a couple different segments. I know my daddy's going to take on, the aspects of pitching and defense, and I'm going to take on the aspects of, the lineup and, what we saw in terms of offensive production throughout this season. And then we'll both kind of give our takes on, management and coaching and what direction, that took us in this season, some negatives, some positives. And then finally, towards the end, we'll get closer to, the 2022 outlook, who stays, who goes. Are we going to add anyone who stays from the current team? Conforto, obviously some guys that are kind of in question to be a part of this Mets team in 2022. So we'll jump right into it. Dad, I'll pass it to you. Give us your thoughts on, 2021 pitching and aspects of the defense that we saw this season.
Okay, in terms of the pitching, I'm going to break it down into two aspects, two grades, more or less, the first half of the season versus the second half. And I'm also going to break it down between starting pitching and the bullpen. For the first half of the season, as far as the starting pitching goes, I've got to give it an A+. And I don't give many A+, but when you look at it, first of all, you had Jacob deGrom, who was having a historical season that we have not seen since the days of Bob Gibson in 1968 and further back with Sandy Koufax. He had a 1.08 ERA heading into the All-Star break. A good portion of that time, he had an ERA under one, as low as I think like 0.67. He had, I believe, 140-something strikeouts versus, I believe, 11 walks. And so with those kind of numbers, I mean, that's greatness that we have not seen in a long, long time from anybody. His presence lengthens the rest of the starting rotation. It made Marcus Stroman and Taijuan Walker, their numbers look that much better as 2s and 3s as opposed to 1 and 2s. Stroman was consistent all year, making 32 starts, usually going 5 or 6 innings, 2 to 3 runs a time. Taijuan Walker was exceptional in the first half. In fact, he was the lone Met representative for the All-Star game. So he was excellent, much more than we had expected. Our back-end guys back then were Joey Lucchesi, who started off really poor but was really coming on, and it was a shame that he was injured because he was really looking good. And Peterson had been up and down but had more recently been up. Tyler McGill emerged sometime around, I think, late May, early June, and was exceptional in the first half. So that all being said, I got to go A+ first half starting pitching. Bullpen, I'll go A, and the only reason I don't give that an A+, Diaz was lights out in the first half in save situations. I think he had about a 1-something ERA, but in non-save, he was high as 5 or 6, and that includes close tie games at the end of games. So that brought it down a little bit, but Familia was exceptional. May was pretty good. He'd been kind of up and down all year. Lugo wasn't with the team at the beginning of the year, but he was doing okay as well. Loop was great all year. Castro was great early on. So first half, I give A+, starting pitching A, bullpen. And as you can imagine, in the second half, it went down some. I have to give the starting pitching in the second half a B. Walker fell off the map for a while. He was just horrific, terrible. And probably a lot of that has to do with the fact he really hadn't pitched that many innings in 2 years, and it caught up to him. So he was terrible, but then kind of rebounded, had some stronger starts at the end, brought it up a little bit, but he was nowhere near what he was in the first half. As I mentioned, Stroman, pretty much the model of consistency, stayed the same, but now we have to view him as a number one. Rich Hill was exactly what you expected when they brought him in. 5 innings per start, 2 to 3 runs each time. Nothing exceptional, but he gave you everything you could have asked for. McGill started off the second half really good, but again, I think he was a victim of not pitching at all last year. Remember, there was no minor league baseball, and he lost a couple of miles an hour off that fastball. And that makes a difference between fly balls to center field and fly balls going off the fence. and location, going from hitting the corners to over the middle of the plate. And so overall, I'm really happy with what he did, and I see him as a possible long back of the end of the rotation guy or a long reliever, but he tailed off as well. So I got to go B, starting pitching. I'm going to go B minus for the relievers. We were in a lot of one-run games that we lost, and a lot of that was the fault of the relievers down the stretch, and it really wasn't one particular guy. It looks like they took turns. I'm a little disappointed overall in Trevor May. I don't think he was terrible, but I expect him to be a little bit better. And if he looked good one night, then the next night Familia gave up a run. Diaz was up and down. He had a period where he blew 3 saves in a row, then picked it back up. The reason why I'm still going B minus, so it isn't all the relievers' fault. There was no cushion there. Every night they came in a game that was either tie, up by a run, down by a run, and so there was no margin of error there. If we'd scored more runs, then that wouldn't have been as magnified. So I don't blame it all on them. So I'll go B, starting pitching, B minus second half. And if you put all 4 of those grades together and you give it one solid grade, I would say the pitching was a B to B plus. And if it wasn't for the offense, which I'll let you get to, we would definitely have been competing right to the very end based on the pitching staff. Even though it faltered a little bit in the second half, it was good enough to compete right to the end for either the division or a wild card. I'll just sum the defense up real quick. I'm not going to break it down too much. The defense was okay. We don't have a lot of guys playing positions. Some are playing out of position. They don't have a position. So you can't rate it too wide. But when Dom Smith was playing and it looked like his head was into the game, he gave you about as much as you could expect in left field. Alonso's gotten better at first. He's never going to be a Gold Glover, but he's gotten better. McNeil, the same thing. These aren't great defensive players, but they played to at least what you expected, if not a little higher. I think Nimmo has improved greatly defensively in center to where now he's an average or slightly above. And then you got Lindor, who's Gold Glove caliber, but he made a few errors along the way. Baez looked excellent. So if I had to give an overall grade to the Mets this year, I'd probably go B minus. No one stood out as being horrific, but a lot of the guys that held their own really weren't that great to begin with, and really don't have. Dom Smith's not a left fielder. I don't know what J.D. Davis is, probably a DH. But, given what we got, they played it to the best of their ability. So I'll go B minus for defense and a solid B for pitching.
Absolutely. And, kind of jumping into the offense and kind of going off of what you said, you mentioned earlier, the bullpen really didn't have any cushion. There were a lot of games, 1-run games, 2-run games, or where we only had a 1-run lead. And, you give up 1 run and it's tied. And the Mets offense pretty much from April all the way up until October, kind of the same story. Kind of breaking down the lineup. You can't talk about the 2021 Mets without bringing up guys like Billy McKinney and Jose Peraza and Nito. And, you talk about a lineup that in April we're thinking, Conforto, Lindor, Nimmo, Pete Alonso, Dom Smith. It was very rare this season that we saw all of these guys in the lineup at the same time. And coming from an offensive standpoint, it was way too often and way too the word of similarity of watching game after game and it being pretty much the same offensive performance day in and day out. And in terms of a letter grade, I think it's kind of hard to put your thumb on, a C or a D or maybe like a B minus because of all the ins and outs of the lineup. Like I mentioned, Billy McKinney, now a Dodger. There was a span where I think 2 weeks he had 5 home runs and a couple game-winning hits. Now he's not even on the Mets, and he's not, he's headed to the playoffs with the Dodgers. You talk about Peraza, who at one point had a nice role on the team. He got hurt. So kind of just looking at, your everyday expected 1 through 9 guys, starting off with Pete Alonso. Obviously, we're recording this a little bit before the end of the season. We're actually heading into Atlanta right now for the final 3-game series, but he's got more than a realistic chance finishing the season with 40 homers. You kind of know what you're going to get from Pete Alonso. One thing I will say from him is it's not apparent whether he has that clutch gene yet. It seems like when you need a big hit, you need a big home run, he's striking out, he's grounding out. But when the game's 8-0 or the game's 7-3 and it's already out of line, you can count on him for the solo homers. And obviously, that makes the stats look good. But in terms of critical moments and critical at bats, you still aren't seeing that, and we haven't seen that since 2019, which obviously ended up being a disappointing season as well. Then we talk about our $340 million man, Francisco Lindor. Obviously his first season, everyone brings up that contract. I know we talked about it the other day. Theoretically, the contract, the guy's not going to be a $340 million man until the beginning of next April. But this is a guy, he hit 230, and that's obviously not what you're expecting from him. He finished the season with 20 home runs, or he's at 20 home runs right now. Could finish with potentially more than that. I want to say he's hit 9 since late August. So he's came on strong post-injury. But, when you talk about the Mets offense, it's really hard to talk about any particular guy without talking about that leave of absence. You're talking about that 6 to 8 week span where Lindor's dealing with the oblique issue. At the time it was, man, we really need to get Lindor back. We really need to get Lindor back. But look, hindsight being 2020, I think we needed him more than we actually thought at that time. We were thinking that, we had that 3 to 5 game cushion, and instantly within a week, it seemed like we were down 2 games in the division. So when you talk about Lindor, absolutely underwhelming. I think what he brings to the table in terms of his defense and, his camaraderie, obviously we saw him and Baez and how they reacted on the field. I think that brings a whole different element that you kind of can't put a number grade on. You can't put a statistic on. But in pure, looking at the numbers, breaking down the analytics, he was underwhelming. He had that big home run against the Yankees, probably when we look back at it, the best moment of the season. But in terms of a whole 160, obviously he didn't play that, but in terms of his whole resume for the 2021 season, you got to consider it underwhelming. One highlight I do want to touch on, Brandon Nimmo. The guy's finished with a 400 on-base percentage now 4 times in his career. Only time he didn't do it was his 2019 injury-riddled season. So when you talk about his performance, he's a guy that I felt going into the season was on the outside looking in terms of the future. Is he an extra outfielder? Is he a part of this ball club moving forward? And if he's able to stay healthy, I think this season proved that he's got to be in your lineup, because you talk about a good hitter, a good baseball player. Like you said, the pitching, it lengthens out your pitching staff. Brandon Nimmo lengthens out these innings, lengthens out your batting, your lineup, and gives opportunities for the guys like Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Dom Smith, who were expected to deliver in those situations. And obviously, we didn't see that much this season, with struggling, especially towards the middle of the season when we saw all the influx of guys moving up and moving down. So in my perspective, it's really hard to put a number grade or even a letter grade on the Mets' offensive performance this season, just because of all the adversity that this team went through. As much as I want to give them some benefit of the doubt because of the injuries, it seemed like the Mets were a more productive team when they had the guys like Peraza and McKinney and the third baseman Drury. It seemed like the Mets were finding ways to will themselves to victory. And then when we started getting somewhat healthy, it's like these guys couldn't produce anything. I want to say in that Giant series against San Francisco Giants and the Dodgers, it was a 13-game span. I want to say we lost 6 or 7 of them by one-run games. And that's because we were losing games 2-1. It wasn't like it was 8-9 and we were producing, just wasn't enough. We weren't putting anything on the table. And like you said, this team could have easily went further and competitive into October if they were able to give their bullpen room cushion and if they were just able to produce. So I'm going to go ahead and, if I had to put a letter grade on it, overall, I'm going to go C-. Obviously, Alonso could get 40 home runs. We saw some great moments from Lindor. Baez at the trade deadline, he's been awesome in terms of what he's brought to the team. And I think if they would have made a stretch to October, we would have seen more of that electricity, his base running, what he was able to do in plays that you thought, okay, it's a bloop single and he's at second. And, the great call by Steve Cohen when they won the game, I want to say it was about a month ago. And Javier Baez turned it into a game-winning slide at the plate. And that was a great moment. So Overall, I'm going to go kind of a C minus. I think with the injuries, you talk about VAR and PR. I think hopefully in 2022, I wouldn't mind seeing them have somewhat of a bench role, but we saw way too much of them playing every day in terms of trying to be competitive in this 2021 season. So, like I said, I think it's pretty hard to adequately, grade this offensive team throughout 162 season because of all the adversity. But with that being said, we'll kind of move along about 15 minutes in. We'll touch on, I know we're both kind of going to touch on Rojas and the management. So I'll go ahead and pass it to you. Overall, we'll break it down from a perspective of, getting your team, managing your team to not only win games, but to further your future success in the season. We saw Rojas kind of pull some pitchers very early in the game because of arm care. And when it got down to winning games in September, there were some very, very questionable decisions in that department. So that I'll let you take over from here. Your thoughts on management and Luis Rojas in particular.
One thing real quick on the offense that I want to add, if I was going to give them a grade like I did, I would probably give them 2 grades, and I would agree with you on a C minus on offense. But if I was also going to do a second grade for offense based on runners in scoring position, I'd probably give them a D minus close to an F. And there's the differentiating right there between hitting when it mattered and hitting when sometimes it didn't matter. So I'd give them a C minus overall, but when it mattered and there was runners in scoring position, they were pretty close to an F. And therefore, we are where we are right now. But anyways, getting into Rojas real quick, a couple of things. He didn't do a good job, and that's clear at this point, but you can't blame it all. You got to understand a couple of things. Rojas is basically a figurehead. We don't know just how much of this came from Rojas and how much it comes from upstairs. And I'm betting a good part of it does. And I don't know if he's in agreement with some of those moves, but the moves he made were scripted. Now, I don't believe he's getting a headpiece and getting phone calls in the middle of the game, but he's got an iPad and he's got a book and he's got a script more or less he's got to follow. So things like taking your starting pitchers out early after 5 innings or 60 or 70 pitches, that's coming from above. Okay, he has no choice in that. I don't know if he agrees with it or not. He may, but a lot of the moves that he made were made upstairs, and he was just being a good soldier and following through. And when you got mad because he took Aaron Loup out after 1 inning because he only threw 7 pitches, there's a analytical statistic or book that he's following that says, based on what we compile here, we need to take him out because if he goes another inning, there's a 70% chance that he's not going to do as well. And a lot of the moves that he made were scripted. You need to really use the eye test and be a little more open, but I don't know if he was afforded that opportunity. And being a young guy managing his first team, they weren't going to give him a lot of leeway there. So on that, even though it comes across as him doing a poor job, I don't blame him too much. Where I really falter him, at the end of the day, your team greatly underachieved for 2 years now. And if you look at the numbers across for Dom Smith, Jeff McNeil, Michael Conforto, your job as a manager is to get as much, at least what the player is capable of. Even if you can't get more than that, good managers do at least get what they're capable of. And for whatever reason, he couldn't do that. Now, do the players like him? I think so. Do the players respect him? I think to a degree. But the respect and the like didn't equate to wins and production. And that's what Sandy Alderson was more or less saying the other day in his press conference, where you can read the writings on the wall that Rojas is gone. Good guy. He'll probably get another shot at it. He got thrown in too soon. He's just turned 40 years old now. But overall, where I fault him and I say he doesn't do a good job, forget about the analytics, forget about what's coming up upstairs. For whatever reason, you couldn't get your players to play to their potential or even close to it for 2 years. So before that, I'm not going to give him a grade. Overall, he was not successful. It didn't work, and it's time to move on. Good luck in the future. He will get another shot, and he may be successful down the road, but he couldn't get his players to perform to the level that they were supposed to, and he was given 2 years to do so.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head there. A couple, you talk about what he's getting delivered from upstairs. Jerry Seinfeld was on the SNY broadcast the other day, and he made a great point, pretty much saying that the season ended for the Mets in St. Louis when Luis Rojas, which, like you said, might not have been Luis Rojas, might have came from upstairs. You don't know if he agrees with it or not. But when he put the prospect of arm care above winning games in late September and August, so I thought that was a great point, and that's the one thing that really stuck out to me is that the one thing that was apparent from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, and he made a point that games in April are just as important as games in September. And when you look at it, I mean, every game holds the same sort of value in terms of where it could get you. But anyone that knows anything about sports is the closer you get to the playoffs, the closer you get to that end point, that point in the season where it's make or break. The value of games increase not by a number, not by analytic, not by a statistic, but by momentum, by getting a team to where they need to be closer to October. And you hit the nail right on the head as well, saying that he didn't get what we needed or what we were expecting production wise out of the lineup. Pitching wise, you touched on it great. You put any type of consistency from the offensive standpoint in this team, and not a doubt is at least competing for a race or a run in October. So with that being said, Rojas seems like a type of guy that the players liked him. I wouldn't exactly call him a player's coach. But he seemed like he, held on to the locker room for a good amount of time. He's been here for 2 years. Obviously, we've heard you made a funny joke the last time I was over at your house. You said, we might not have been successful, but everybody made some good friends. And, that plays along with Rojas. Like I said, he seemed like a good guy. He held the team together in terms of how everyone got along and relationships wise. But at the bottom line, this is professional baseball. Wins and losses matter. And that eventually, that at the bottom line determines his future. He will get another shot with a team, and there's a good chance that he'll be successful. And probably what he takes away from this Mets regime and goes on to his future will help him in the long run, because maybe when he goes to another organization, he'll have more free reign. He'll have more decision-making aspects, and maybe we'll be able to get a better read of what type of manager he really is. But, we saw guys like Stroman, Loop, Walker, all have comments, mixed emotions about getting pulled earlier in games than they were expecting to, or than to their liking. So, if I had to give them a grade, a letter grade, number grade, we often get stuck on that. You got to give them a C- because, you give them the benefit of the doubt for holding the locker room together in terms of relationships. But like I said earlier, it's professional baseball. Wins and losses matter. And, I wish the guy the best in the future, but I really find it difficult to think that, in 2022, he's going to be the manager of the Mets. So with that being said, speaking of 2022, let's kind of get an outlook on what we expect, not only what we expect, but what we would hope for. So, Dad, I'll pass it to you. Obviously, some pending free agents. You got Stroman, you got Conforto, you got Syndergaard, you got Baez. All guys that are current Mets that could, be extended qualifying offers, could sign larger contracts. I know Stroman said in an post-game interview the other day, it's the first time in his career in a while that he's going to be joining a team. He made the comment that he's going to be joining a team for more than 1 year. So obviously you read between the lines, and he's looking for something more of a long-term contract. Steve Cohen at the helm, money shouldn't be a problem. The luxury tax, he's made comments saying that if we're going to go over it, we're going to blow over it. We're not going to hover around the line. So with that being said, Dad, thoughts on, 2020 season in terms of management and in terms of potential, personnel decisions?
Okay, I'll start from the top and work my way down. Obviously, there's going to be a new president of player, development and player operations, team operations, whatever you want to call it. And from there, then we'll get our new general manager. Obviously, we're not going to have the same assistant general manager. I don't think he's going to remain in the organization after what happened with his issues. But so we're going to get we're going to go right from the top, new, whatever you want to call it, president of player development, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to get a new manager. And if you're expecting, I hear a lot of people say, we need to bring someone who's going to light a fire under their butt. We need someone, a taskmaster. And that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen anymore in baseball. Those days are over. I'm not going to say I wouldn't mind that since I'm old school. But if you're expecting Wally Backman to walk in the door, Wally Backman ain't never coming back, okay? Buck Showalter is probably never coming back. But I'll tell you a guy that I think is the perfect manager candidate, and that's the guy that was hired 2 years ago, Carlos Beltran. Why not another shot? Hinch has gotten another shot. Cora's gotten another shot. The Astros players have been playing all along. I think this guy is perfect. I think he's a kind of a good blend between that taskmaster and Louis Rojas, somewhere in the middle. And where I believe he's going to command more respect is just because who he is as a former baseball player. The guy's a borderline Hall of Famer, if not a Hall of Famer. 435 lifetime homers, 1,500 RBIs, almost a 280 batting average. I think he's played close to 20 years in the MLB. And let's face it, sometimes we respect people more if they've done it. I've done that on my jobs. If someone was telling me that's never been an instructor before how I need to teach my classes, a lot of times I'm thinking this guy or gal has never taught a class in their life and they're telling me what to do. And I think that holds true sometimes with players. And not to say Rojas didn't know what he's doing, but he never played in the major leagues. He's got a good family pedigree, but maybe that difference between the guy that's a Hall of Famer and the guy that never played might be enough to command a little bit more respect and get a little bit more attention to the players. And maybe they'll be more apt to actually listen to what he has to say. So I think Beltran would be the perfect candidate, and we'll see what the new regime says there. Now, getting to the players, and I'm just going to touch on really our players because I'm not really sure what we can do with other players once we get done spending the money that we might be spending. So I'm just going to touch on ours. First of all, I would say that between Dom Smith, J.D. Davis, Jeff McNeil, and Michael Conforto, you're probably going to see one of those four, possibly two, come back, depending on whether or not we have the DH. Michael Conforto's gone. If you weren't sure, just watch the game yesterday.
Yeah.
You know he's met with his agent, Scott Boras, before. They already know they're not going to accept a qualifying offer. And that's why there were tears coming from his eyes and he was emotional. He's going to get that offer. He's not going to take it. He's not going to get the deal that he expected. But someone's going to take a chance on Michael Conforto, I think, for at least 3 years, maybe 15 to 20 million a year, just on the guy he is, his prior performance, the quiet leadership. So Conforto's not coming back. If we have a DH, maybe you see either JD or Dom come back, one of the two, but not both. Alonso's gotten good enough now to where I don't even know if Dom's a better fielding first baseman than Alonso. Dom hasn't played first base in a year. So this Alonso DH is Dom plays first thing. I don't know about that anymore. And there's something going on with Dom, maybe personal life-wise or health-wise that we don't know yet. But there's something there in the second half. They couldn't even put him out in the field anymore. He dropped a couple of routine pop-ups. It looked like his head wasn't into it. I don't know if he's banged up, with injury-wise, but he's just not the same player. Hasn't homered in 2 months. So definitely one of the two won't be back, but if we have a DH, maybe one can come back as a DH. And I believe Jeff McNeil, I might be in a minority, but I think Jeff McNeil is the most likely of that group to come back.
Yeah, I agree.
Not as a starter, but as like a jack of all trades kind of guy. Maybe fills the role. Fills the role of VR next year. He can play third. He can play second. He can play the two corner spots. And I really do. He can revert back to that 300 hitter, maybe with the right tutelage and right direction to be that line drive gap to gap hitter again. So if I'm a betting man, I'm going to say McNeil comes back and the other three don't. As far as our high price free agents go, other than Conforto, it all depends on the price they're willing to accept. I think Syndergaard will come back. he will accept a qualifying offer, or they'll work out a 1 or 2 year incentive laden deal where he gets less money. But if he meets all the criteria of innings pitched and games started, he can make more money and
Yeah.
maybe get that second year. So out of all the free agents, I think he's the most likely to come back. And excuse me, I will say that Baez will come back if Baez is willing to accept a 5 year deal, maybe 25 to 27 million a year, which takes him to 125 to 130. I think we bring him back, and that'll be our big free agent signing. If he's looking for Lindor years and Lindor money, we just can't do it. You can't have two guys making 300 something million for 10 years. And then when they get in their later years, like Cano is now, and they're in their mid 30s and we're still locked in at that kind of money, it's just not good business practice. But if he really wants to play with Lindor and he really wants to stay with the Mets and he's willing to accept a 5 year, pretty lucrative deal of 25 to 27 million, he comes back. I think, again, Stroman's good, but he's not elite. I don't look at him as elite. He's a 5 to 6 inning pitcher, giving up 2 to 3 runs a time. That's very valuable. If he's willing to accept a 4 year deal in the low 20 range, that's great. We're paying him 4 years, 80 something million. That's great. I tend to believe that he's less likely to do that. So if I'm going to make a prediction as far as free agents go, I'm going to predict Syndergaard and Baez come back, and Conforto and Stroman don't. So that's kind of my overall outlook where we're going management-wise and players.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Carlos Beltran originally hired before Rojas. And we've seen how that worked out. So with the Astro scandal and everything detailing all the way back to 2017. So I definitely agree with you. That would be a great option. You got the experience there. You also have the relationship between former player, current players. And, Beltran was no slouch. Beltran was an all-star, a guy that, played meaningful baseball in the playoffs. And he, one of the better Mets of all time. So you made a great point in terms of managerial, and I kind of want to touch on Stroman and Syndergaard real quick. You mentioned also with Conforto, you watch his game from yesterday, got the standing ovation, looked like tears were going to come from his eyes. He's probably not coming back. He's the type of guy to where going into the season, it was, do we extend Conforto and Lindor first? And while both struggled, I think extending Lindor, obviously, in the long run is probably going to be more beneficial. And if we would have extended Conforto ahead of Lindor and went through half of the season with, all right, are we going to lock Lindor up, especially with Conforto's play? Definitely would have been a bit of a headline. So don't think he's coming back. I absolutely agree with you in terms of Jeff McNeil. Reminds me a bit of a Ben Zobrist kind of guy who we saw with the Rays and the Cubs. If he's your first guy off the bench, you're in pretty good shape, because I do think, like you said, he could return back to that 300 area hitter. And he could play second. He could play third. I think we even saw him at some points taking reps in left field, if I'm not mistaken, or he was shagging balls, preparing to play some outfield. So if he's your guy coming off the bench, like a Lindor or Baez, if he returns to the team, goes down, and he's your fill-in stopgap, I think you're in great shape. Moving forward to Stroman, I would love to see him part of this Mets team in 2022. But like you said, something I don't know what it is. It's the way he carries himself. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. Obviously, he's very comfortable in his own skin, and he's very comfortable in dictating what he wants. But just kind of reading in between the lines of how he talks to the media, it almost seems like he's ready for not only a change, not only a secure contract, but almost a change of scenery. I would think that he's probably looking for number one money, when the truth is we've got Jacob deGrom, and if he's healthy, then not only is he the number one on the Mets, but he's probably the best pitcher in baseball. So Syndergaard could be offered that qualifying offer. I think he said, talking to the media, that would be something he'd be more than willing to do, or something that he definitely would consider. He holds a special place in his heart for New York, which I truly believe has been here ever since we traded the Toronto Blue Jays R.A. Dickey for him and some other prospects. So I definitely think Syndergaard returns. Baez, I would love to see Baez back. I think that you can argue that his addition to the team was almost more impactful than Francisco Lindor at this point. And the combination of the two, I think it's really hard to put into words or into numbers what the two of them together could do over a 162 game slate. So we'll love to see Baez come back. In terms of, is it going to be Baez or Stroman? I do think that, talking money-wise, it's probably going to come down to one of the two, because Stroman's going to want that 25 to 27. I could even see him looking for $30 million annually, depending on, what market he ends up in. He's mentioned, returning back to the Blue Jays at times. He said, he could stay in New York and end up a Yankee. So I think in all likelihood, I think we see one of two in terms of Baez and Stroman, and right now I would lean Baez just because of the money per value factor. And then you talk about the four guys in Conforto, Dom Smith, Jeff McNeil, and J.D. Davis. If the DH is here, if the DH is in the NL and it's here to stay, I believe in J.D. Davis as a hitter. Obviously, he's been a guy that's been able to produce at the plate his whole career. It's more been the fielding aspect and where to find him plug and play. And in fact, if I had to choose, Dom Smith at first or Pete at DH, or keeping Pete at first and having J.D. Davis as a DH, I would probably lean more towards J.D. Davis, an everyday hitter. And then, in a squeeze, you can plug him in at third base. You can plug him in left field or any of the corner outfield positions if that's something that he's able to do. And real quick, I do want to touch on some not Mets and kind of a pipe dream. Recent reports, I think really coming from just the past couple days, saying that the Padres could actually be considering trading Manny Machado. I think that would be something that the Mets would definitely have to look into. You talk about if you're going to go over that luxury tax line, that you're going to blow by it. That would mean an potential infield of Dom Smith, Pete Alonso, Javier Baez, Francisco Lindor, and Manny Machado at third. I mean, could be a pipe dream, could take a lot of prospects, could mean some shaking up in our farm system, obviously. But we have seen some tension in the past week or past month, you can really say, in the Padres clubhouse, whether it be with Tatis or Machado. Obviously, their manager, after being in the driver's seat for a playoff spot, he's on the hot seat. So we could see them shake it up a little bit, and maybe the Mets benefit from that. And another potential free agent sticking at that third base position is Carlos Correa. Played on Team Puerto Rico with Francisco Lindor, Javier Baez, Edwin Diaz. I think it's definitely something that Correa would be consider. I think even he's came out in the media and said that he would consider playing third base for the Astros or playing third base for another team. And he's even mentioned that, he would love to play with Baez at Lindor at some point in his career in the major league level. Obviously, can't read into that too much. Money comes into play. He's been in Houston his whole career at this point. So, like I said, Machado, Correa could be a pipe dream. If we do bring in one of those guys, it probably very well likely does mean that there's no way of retaining both Stroman and Baez. But we'll see. We kind of got to let Steve Cohen, hate to say it, put his money where his mouth is. He made the expectation of 3 to 5 years, and we're a year into it. So he's got to have some type of plan, some type of step-by-step process heading into this offseason to make this team better, because I hate to say it, if we're bringing the whole gang back for another run, saying, it was a bad year all the way around, hopefully these guys can elevate their game in 2022. I just don't see it happening. So I definitely think we're going to have to bring in some sort of outside talent, some sort of potential outside of the organization to elevate this team. So with that being said, touched on offense, touched on defense, touched on the managerial options and some potential outlooks on 2022. Dad, before we get out of here, just some final comments on the Mets season as a whole, and kind of how they left you feeling. It's been we're 4 weeks into the Jets season, hasn't been very optimistic, and we've dealt with the Mets since April. So just some final thoughts as we put this season to bed.
Definitely one of the most disappointing seasons that I remember. I know people say, there's been a lot worse. Yeah, there have been worse teams. I can take you back to the 60s, from 62 to 68. the mid 70s into the early 80s. But if you looked at their lineup and you looked at the players that were on the team, the expectations were low. When you look at this lineup, this team was built to win. Now, even with the injuries we had, they did a really good job of going out and getting some good bench players. And you just look at it was just a total collapse from it just seemed like everybody underperformed greatly this year. And then there were the issues with the thumbs down and the whole rat issue and Jake being hurt. It just seemed like everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. And it was just an overall one of the most disappointing seasons. And I don't remember a team underachieving and collapsing as much as this one. And all you had to do was be average this year. And the division really was there for taking. And we couldn't be. And really, it's the second year in a row because last year all we had to do was be 500 to be one of the 8 teams to make the playoffs. Even the Marlins made it, and we couldn't do it. So to me, we've reached the pinnacle right now of just utter disappointment. And it was exciting because there was always something crazy going on.
Yeah.
Some guy gets hit in the head one day with a throw, and every night there was something to watch. But if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say disappointing as far as this year goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We had high expectations from the beginning of the season. We had high expectations leaving Atlanta, going towards the rest of the season, obviously, when we attended that game. And then, there were chances. Even when we thought the season was done, the Mets had plenty of chances to pick up ground against the Braves, pick up ground against the Phillies. But, that's really there's 2 words I can think of: disappointing and underwhelming. And you just got to hope for the best heading into the 2022 season. I do think that, hopefully with Cohen and a new manager at the helm, and then potentially, you talk about Billy Beane, Theo Epstein, also pipe dreams. But, you just got to you got to hope for the best heading into 2022. It definitely was an entertaining season, more negative than positive, but a season that I'll probably remember for, the remainder of my life, and, whether it be because of the disappointment or whether it be because, like you said, you had the thumbs down, you had the Subway Series against the Yankees, you had the rat or the raccoon. So definitely entertaining, definitely disappointing. Both kind of play into each other. So, guys, if you made it this far, we appreciate you tuning in, appreciate you listening. Jets Titans 1:00 on Sunday. Definitely looking forward to that. Jets trying to get on track, get a win, and get a notch in the win column. So we'll definitely be back Monday or Tuesday for some more. Guys, stay tuned. YouTube page coming soon. We're going to attempt to start streaming on YouTube. Not sure whether that's coming this week or in the following weeks, but definitely something that we have in the works. So stay tuned for content, guys. We appreciate y'all tuning in, and we'll be back for more New York Sports Rehab. We're out.